of reason of fate, they didn't quite make it. Either they chose not to or something came along. So let me tell you, in the case of Stan Long, what could have been. But before I do, you might say, well, why do you even care? I think. Okay, so why do we care? Well, I think, the database would tell us there's thousands, hundreds of thousands of hockey players that have never played in the NHL, but they have an interesting story. And especially the ones that were on the verge of making it, that were on the cusp of the NHL. These guys are the fabric of the game. Now, some of you will know a few of these players. Jim Connolly's up here. He's a SIHR member. And Jim was an accountant. And he chose to play Senior A hockey with the Chatham Maroons rather than go on and play pro hockey with Cleveland at the time. And he told me at one of the meetings, he said, I knew they weren't going to trade me, because if they traded me, I quit and stayed with the accounting firm. Other players, Jack McLean, he was on a team with Wendy O'Neill and Dr. Bobby Kopp. We know from Kevin Shea's recent book, his story, and if you haven't read it, I would really recommend you pick it up, Jack in the Box. But Jack went on to become an engineer, chose not to play pro hockey, and pursue a career as an engineer. Wendy O'Neill on that team, Conn Smythe said he was the greatest piano player that ever played in the NHL. But Wendy O'Neill played with the Leafs, won a cup, but had a career in law and chose to go that way. So like Jack McLean, Wendy was using the Leafs to fund his university education. Bobby Kopp went on to become a dentist, and again was just using the time in Toronto to fund his education. So these guys have a very interesting story, and in some ways more interesting than the guys that played 1,000 games in the NHL. For me personally, I've always been interested in the fringe players. When I was about 8 years old, I started to get Beehive hockey pictures. And I won't bore you to death about Beehive, but some of the ones that caught my eye was this Don Head guy. Who is he? He wasn't with Boston by the time I got the picture, but kind of an interesting guy. And then when the Wood Grains came out, there was a Cliff Pennington. And my goodness, he didn't play in the NHL. So these guys had long careers in pro hockey. They were up with, in this case, Boston, had a part of a season, had a coffee with the team, had some publicity, but really formed, for me, the fabric of the game and the interest. Other types of players that I have an interest in, Gary Hull. Who the heck is Gary Hull? Well, he's Dennis Hull's brother, Bobby Hull's brother. Didn't quite make it, so he's one of the other brothers that I have an interest in. You've all heard of Vic Howe, probably. Well, he's another one that wanted to play hockey, played pro hockey, but other than a short stint in New York, didn't stay in the NHL. Yes, yeah. And then finally, there's the guys that are famous for being one-night wonders. Ken Reid, in his book, he called them one night only, but most of the one-night wonders you've never heard of. A couple you have, David Ayres, another guy that's been at a recent meeting. Don Cherry, more famous for being a talker than a hockey player. But it's always interesting how these guys become successful in some way. But if they're one-game wonders, it's not because of their time in the NHL. What I'm going to tell you about this afternoon then is someone who is a three-game wonder, and that is Stanley Gordon Red Long. And I chose him for a couple of reasons. The first reason is that he was a Victoria Cougar, so it fits with our meeting here today. And his story is best told in four parts. How did he get to Victoria? Telling you about getting called up to the NHL the first time, than the second call-up, which is the pivotal point in his life, not just his career, his life, and his life after pro hockey. So Stan was a defenseman, and I will declare that I said there were a couple of reasons I picked him. My other reason is that he's my stepdad's brother, eldest brother. And I didn't really know Stan. I met him once when I was a teenager in Manitoulin Island, family cottage, but for the most part, had a very separate existence. So what I know of Stan, what I'm going to share with you today is what my stepdad has told me about his brother and what I've learned of from my own research. Stan was born in Owen Sound. All three brothers were born in Owen Sound. He was born November 29, 190-pound defenseman. Had a lot of hockey potential from the start. His brother Clyde was a little bit smaller, about 170 pounds. He played forward. And then there was Norm, who's my stepdad. He was a goalie, and he would tell you he bulked up to be a goalie, so I'm not going to declare his weight. And the family, by the way, was rounded out with three sisters, but none of them played hockey, so I'm not going to tell you about them. So Stan came up through the Owen Sound junior hockey ranks, minor hockey ranks rather, and was attracted by Hap-Ems to go play in Barrie. And he joined Barrie in the Flyers in 1946, played part of a season, 14 games with the Flyers, and he also played intermediate hockey there with the Barrie Colts. He was in Barrie with the Flyers for 4 seasons, and these three pictures are fairly significant. Nothing to do with Stan, but Hap-Ems was rather cheap. And so you'll notice the sweater on the left is a picture of him with the Flyer sweater that you may have seen before if you looked at some old pictures. It's the St. Louis Flyers sweater from the American Hockey League. And it was, they were getting new sweaters, so Hap-Ems had played there. He had contacts in St. Louis, so it just happened the team name was the same, so that became the team sweater. Somewhere along the way, he picked up other sweaters. I think the second one was an old Buffalo sweater that he bought the team sweaters there. And then, so anyways, in 4 years, 3 different sweaters, 3 distinctly different brands. So this was the early part of Stan's career. As I said, he started in Owen Sound, playing minor hockey and then up through the junior ranks. The Kennedys was a commercial league team that a lot of these guys in that time, there weren't enough junior games in a season to make it a full season, so they often played for a second team. Going into Barrie, I mentioned his career in 46, 47, playing junior and intermediate. And then we looked 1947, 48. It was really a breakout year for Stan. He had 34 points in 30 games. And a further 70 minutes in penalties. The significance of that, 34 points in 30 games, is he was a defenseman. So he's better than a point a game, a defenseman. That team made it to the Memorial Cup finals. They were defeated by Port Arthur Bruins. And in the playoff series, he played a further 23 games with the Flyers. He had another 26 points. So again, we have a defenseman, better than a point a game in the regular season, better than a point a game in the playoffs. And he had a further 70 minutes in penalties. He was born in 29. And notably, this is the only year that he was an OHL All-Star, but he was an All-Star that year. In 48-49, the Flyers also won the OHA league title, but they were eliminated by a team out of Montreal, the Montreal Junior Royals. Stan was the highest scoring defenseman on the team that year with 50 points in 42 games. So again, better than a point a game as a defenseman. And he had 16 points in the playoffs in 16 games. And in his final year, he had another 56 points in 42 games. He led the whole team in assists and in penalty minutes. So the significance of this is along the way, Montreal heard about this guy. They didn't have to negotiate with him. They could put him on their protected list, and he became property of the Montreal Canadiens. And eventually, they did make contact with him, and he signed a C card, and so he was their property for life. But what Montreal saw in him, coming out of junior, was someone who was a defenseman. He could play tough, manage his own end, but he consistently was scoring better than a point a game in junior hockey. And the significance of that was that General Manager Frank Selke was preparing for a time when Butch Bouchard would retire, and he needed someone to replace him. So this was someone he was developing with that in mind. So 1950-51, after going to the Montreal camp, they put him down with the Royals, keep him in Montreal, see him in game competition, but they assessed that he had more potential than playing in the Quebec Senior League, and they sent him out to Victoria. Significance of that is that he was there in time to be on the league champion Victoria Cougars team that won the last Pacific Coast League title. The next season, they became the Western Hockey League entry. And so that was, again, significant for him being part of a winning combination. In 1951, he's back to training camp with the Canadiens, but it's significant that they sent him down to play in Buffalo. And the significance of that is that the WHL was a better caliber than the Quebec League. The AHL was better caliber than the Western Hockey League. So you can see Montreal was methodically moving him up the ranks, and he got to play against some pretty good competition. And he was assessed as the most valuable player for Montreal in 51, or for Buffalo rather, in 51-52. So some pretty good street cred as things goes on, as his career is developing. In the spring of 52, he got called up to the Montreal Canadiens for 3 playoff games. So fairly significant accomplishment. Dollard St. Laurent was a defenseman that was established with Montreal at that point, and he was injured. So Stan was called up to join a complement of Butch Bouchard, Doug Harvey, Tom Johnson, and Bud McPherson. We have no way of knowing how much he actually played. He's given credit for being in 3 games, but how many minutes he got, we don't know, because he was the 5th defenseman, so we're assuming not a lot of playing time. But he was on the team. This wasn't just a picture from training camp. There's the season end team shot, and there's Stan in the upper right-hand corner of the screen. So that picture came from Paul Meagher's collection. I don't know if you know the name Paul Meagher, but he was a pretty successful young player playing with Montreal, and we could be doing a presentation about him today because he, in 1954, crashed into the boards, had a major brain injury, and retired from hockey at that point. So, but it was doing quite well with the Canadiens, and again, had it not been for the injury, he might be as well known as a Ralph Backstrom or a Bobby Russo. So, 1952-53, after training camp, Stan is sent back to the Cougars. The Canadiens figured at that point they had enough experience on the team. They didn't want to break up the roster. So they had Bouchard, Harvey, Johnson, McPherson, Dollard St. Laurent. Rolly Russo is in the Quebec League. That's Bobby's brother, and he could be called up in an emergency if needed. Ivan Irving was a tough defenseman that did get to play a few games with the Canadiens, but he was shipped out with Stan to Victoria. Stan was told he was being sent down for seasoning, and that makes sense. But what was interesting is he was told that it was easier to call him up from the Western Hockey League than it was from the American Hockey League with Buffalo. And I tried to do some research on this. I couldn't find anything online. And Craig Campbell and Kevin Shea at the Hockey Hall of Fame did some digging around in their records. They couldn't find anything. So if anybody in this audience or anyone watching on the internet or on the Zoom call can shed light, I'd love to hear from you. I don't know if it was a league agreement or if it was a team agreement, but certainly I think the thing was that the American Hockey League was a pretty high status league relative to the NHL. They had some negotiation power, and they didn't want players being moved up and down, and they wanted some stability, where the Western Hockey League was just happy to get some good young players, and they knew that because they were so far away that they weren't going to be moved too quickly. So that's the story. Stands out in Victoria, has a pretty good start to the season, 51 games, not quite the same amount of points that he's had certainly earlier in his career. 28 points in 51 games, 55 minutes in penalties. But his teammates, Ivan Irvin, Fiore Geoghegan, was Pete Geoghegan and Tony Geoghegan's brother, and Ernie Roche. So Stan was the star defenseman in Victoria, and in fact, he did get called up. On February the 25th, 1953, Victoria was in Saskatoon to play an away game, and they got the call from Montreal. At this point, Stan is, excuse me, Stan is 22 years old. He's having a second call up to the Montreal Canadiens, and life was looking pretty good. But at that point, because they were playing out of town, the team management couldn't get a call up real easily. The guy they wanted to bring up was a guy by the name of Jack Kirk, who was playing somewhere in the BC interior. They were in Saskatoon. There was a game that night. So the coach, Ed Dorahy, who was also a teammate of Stan, said, "Hey, Stan, how about playing the game tonight? We can get you in the game, get you out on the next flight to Montreal. You may miss a practice, but you're not going to miss any game time. And we'd really appreciate the help, eh, buddy?" So Stan, thinking what could go wrong, he played one last game with Victoria. And when I say one last game, it was one last game because in the game, he collided with a fellow called Chuck McCullough of the Saskatoon Quakers. Chuck was he gave up over 20 pounds in weight to Stan. He gave up about 4 inches in height, so he was not a big player. But when they made contact, his stick came up and hit Stan in the groin. It not only hit him, it broke off and penetrated his left groin, the upper left leg. Stan arrived at the hospital, critical condition. He had a stick fragment in his leg, 3 inches long, 3/4 inches wide, and he was in pretty serious condition. We went into surgery immediately. During the process of getting him stable and stitched up, he lost 12 pints of blood over the period of the surgery. My wife, being a former nursing teacher, said, "Well, that's interesting. How much blood does the man have?" Looked it up, thanks to Google, and the average 190-pound man has about 10.5 to 12 pints of blood. So in the process of surgery, they replaced 12 pints of blood, and so he essentially had a complete oil change. Yeah, Saskatoon. So after the extraction of the piece of wood, they used 45 stitches to close his wound. So they didn't think he was going to live. They called his mother and his wife, and they came out. They were at his bedside. For a few days, it was touch and go as to whether he'd live. when it became obvious that he would live, the doctor came in and they said, we've decided that it's time to amputate your leg. And Stan wouldn't have anything of it. He said, no, I want to keep it. I'm going to play hockey again. And they said, no, it's not going to happen. We will comply with your request not to amputate, but we'll tell you that you'll never walk again. And so after further recovery, he decided that he was going to be able to walk and he was going to be able to skate. And that was his goal, that he would get out of hospital and go back to being a hockey player. When he did get checked out of hospital, and I don't have dates as to how long he was in there, this 190-pound, 22-year-old man had dropped from 190 pounds to 145. So a lot of weight loss, a lot of muscle loss. And when he was discharged in Victoria, the Canadians immediately transferred him to Montreal, him and his wife, and they brought him to Montreal to be under the care of the Canadians' famed physiotherapist, Bill Head. And I don't know if you've heard about Bill Head, but if you haven't and you're at all curious, there's a good YouTube video, about a 5-minute video about him. He was a Brit who studied therapeutic massage in France, and the long story short, when he came to Canada, because he could speak French, he settled in Montreal. He got a job originally with the YMCA, didn't have much of a career there, ended up going to Quebec City and being part of the company that owned the Aces. And when they found out about his skills, he started working with the Aces, and one thing led to another, and he was in Montreal as far as I know, the first physiotherapist to be working with any NHL team. And the documentary online said that people like Beliveau and Dickie Moore have said that he was the unsung hero and the reason that Montreal was so successful during their 5 Cup wins, because he was getting these star players that were injured, getting them back on the ice. And he was the fellow that actually was given credit for saving Boom Boom Geoffrion's life when he had the accident in practice and ruptured his spleen. So anyways, Bill Head took over the treatment of Stan. He taught Stan's wife, Stevie, how to do therapeutic massage on the leg, and he made enough progress that Stevie and Stan were able to move back to Barrie that spring, summer, and at first Stan couldn't do much, but eventually he started to be able to walk. To get exercise, he got a job in the Brewers retail warehouse, lifting kegs and beer cases, all the time thinking, I'm going to play hockey again. I would tell you the difficulty even in going to work in the beer store was his toes on his left foot were curled under his foot. So he had to have a special pair of shoes, a special pair of work boots, and eventually a special skate designed to accommodate the thicker foot with the toes underneath. And you can imagine from a skating perspective, the strength in his left leg for pushing off was dramatically weakened. Beyond that, his left leg would go numb after about 3 minutes of skating. So it really was a challenge for him to get back on skates and compete. But the Canadians were still very interested, as much as they just about lost the guy, and he clearly had some deficiencies. They saw potential in him. And the family has a copy of his 1953-54 contract that he signed with Canadians. So this is after the major injury, and they signed him to a contract with the Canadians, $100 a game with the Canadians over a 70-game season. That means a $7,000 contract, which was, I think, fairly good at that time. What's interesting is they noted that he would get $450 if he was, or $4,500 if he was in the Western League, and $3,500 if he played in the Quebec League. No mention of him playing in the American Hockey League. And again, I don't know if that has something to do with the call-up circumstances. There were also some bonuses if he was an all-star or based on the team performance. The ironic thing, because I've seen that contract, he reported to the Buffalo Bison's training camp, farm team of the Canadians. It was in Verdun in September of '53. And coming out of camp, he had made the team. So despite this serious injury, he made the team. And he went to Buffalo. He played 6 games. And I talked to Pierre Pilote at the dust up in Penetanguishene. And I asked him, because Pierre was in Buffalo at that point, what his assessment was of Stan. He says, hey, he was a competitive, he had potential. At that point, with the injury, Pierre didn't see him as a star NHL player, but he said he could make an NHL team. And he talked about probably, would have been a better fit for Boston or New York at that point. But sadly, because of the circulation in his leg, he developed an infection, and the team advised him to not play. Well, the doctors advised him not to play any more hockey that season. And so at this point, I believe he's still 24 years old, and he's retired from professional hockey. The Kitchener Green Shirts were affiliated with the Canadians, and they gave him a job in the OHA of coaching. And he was named coach mid-January of '54, and he lasted a whole month as coach. They were down in Jonquière playing the Marquis team, and the team was playing, the Jonquière team was playing very aggressively, a lot of fights. Stan didn't like seeing the young hockey players treated like that, and he pulled his team off the ice, wouldn't put them back on the ice, and so he was suspended from coaching. And as a result, then, I think at this point, he's now 25 years old, and he's retired from coaching. So what did he do after that? Well, he acquired a BA service station, gas station dealership, if you will, in the town of Durham, just south of Owen Sound. He played 2 seasons with the Durham Huskies. They're intermediate B team. In the second year there, they won the Ontario Intermediate B Championship. So here was a guy on the way up. He was going to be with the Canadians, and he's playing intermediate B hockey. The connections are pretty strong between old hockey players. And Jimmy Strawn, who was the goaltender in Strathroy Rockets, he'd got a job there as the rec director. He was trying to build up the team, and he got in touch with Stan because they'd been teammates in Barrie, and said, why don't you come down to Strathroy? The pool hall's for sale, and you could make the team here. So Stan moved, gave up the gas dealership, and he moved to Strathroy, which is where he played the rest of his hockey career, which was 5 seasons up to 1960-61, mostly playing intermediate hockey. One highlight, maybe this is a highlight of his career, he was picked up by the Chatham Maroons, the senior A team. They were winning, they had won the Allen Cup. Some of them went on to play in 1960 in the Olympics, and they couldn't roster a full team to go to Europe, and so they were picking up some of the best players they could find to go with them. And Stan, even though he was playing Senior B, they approached him, and he joined the team to tour Europe, and they became the second Canadian team to play in Russia. I believe that the first team was from Penticton, if I'm not mistaken. Kelowna, yeah. So he suffered a heart attack when he was 30. He retired thus as a competitive hockey player. He operated the pool hall until his passing, age 52, in 1982. So that was his story, and it gives you a picture of what could have been, because if he had been healthy and able to stay with the Canadians, there's a reasonable chance he would have been on 6 Stanley Cup winning teams, and everybody in this room would probably know who he was. And that's my story of what could have been for Stan Long. James.
Kind of an odd question. Do you know if he lived the rest of his life with his toes curled under his
Yes,
foot?
yes, he did.
He did. Because my mother would be mortified if she knew I was telling you guys right now. Had something very similar happen to her when she was a teenager. And it wasn't until much later in life where they were able to do surgery where they replaced all the bones in her toes so that she had a straight foot. But
Yeah. No, as
yeah.
far as I know, he it was never fixed, and he always had a, a modest limp.
Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
did he have children, and did the children play ice hockey?
He had 3 children.